Now, for the past 6 months, we've been trying to get Dad's car into the dyno so we can see what kind of power it made with the turbo GT40 little budget junkyard build that we had going on. We've been fighting a little bit of the elements, and we've been going back and forth trying to get the thing ready for yet another dyno session. But before we get there, we got some things we got to go through. There's some things on Dad's car that aren't right, and we're going to have to get it into the garage and figure it out. So we got a little bit of work to do today. We're going to be checking some of the things on the ignition. We're going to be looking into some of the wiring and some of the fuel pumps. When you start making more power, you got to pay attention to this stuff because it'll leave you at your dyno, or you're going to be left stuck on the side of the road with a broke down car. We haven't started it since we've been to the dyno. Problems that Dad's car suffers from is the parasitic loss. We went through a couple batteries with this car, and we actually have a cutoff switch. We'll talk about the parasitic loss when we get it into the garage. It's kind of cold out, so let's just see if it fires up.
So there's a block back there.
Nope. Got the old jump box. I mean, it has been like 20 degrees here for like the last 2 months. It kills the batteries, even with the cutoff switch. Give us another shot. Now we know it works. Up here in the north, we'd be going through batteries non-stop. Like it says, like a 3 or 4 or 5 year warranty. If you get 2 years out of a battery, it still starts the car. It's a good idea. You got yourself a good battery. Starting to get a full house in here, aren't we? Mm-hmm. Okay, so real quick, I wanted to talk about that parasitic loss once again. Just mean that somewhere in your car you have a battery drain, and it's such a pain in the ass to try to figure it out. I'm going to show you some real quick places here on my dad's car that we actually disconnected. We don't actually have the sun visor. We're restoring still some of this car, but the sun visor is definitely one of the can like drain your battery and you not even know it. And it could be just from this light. We've actually disconnected underneath of the harness here. To be honest with you guys, I'm good with not having vanity lights. One of the issues that these sun visors go through is this little flap here. You can see it's really kind of loose. It lets this button, this is the button for the on-off light, and it lets this button, if it's not tight, then it's going to leave it on. Sun visors, they like to melt. I've seen plenty of sun visors with this plastic melted because literally the light was on for like ever. And it's just this little switch. It's just this little flap. It's just one of many areas. I just wanted to show you a couple areas on my dad's car that I disconnected because of that very same problem with parasitic loss. The other place that I have found this light on is back here in the hatch. There's this button here, and there's usually a light on back here, this little hatch light. This is actually the same light as a sunroof. And for whatever reason, I've found that light. If you don't get the hatch closed perfectly, if that switch isn't working, or hell, even one of these doors buttons, they're not functioning correctly. You can see how it just shuts it off when you close the door. We found on my dad's car, it wasn't shutting some of them lights off, and we found on my dad's driver's side that had the melted plastic, the driver's sun visor was melted. But again, that's not what we're really here to talk about tonight. We had an ignition problem at the dyno. If you see here, we were making a pull in the dyno.
10 pounds, I think it was.
Yeah, blown out spark.
Started blown out.
Yeah. And in the last video, it started what we think was blowing out spark. So we're gonna chase an ignition issue. We're gonna look at the spark plugs real quick, kind of tell us a story of what's going on with the car, and then get an idea where we're at next, because we're gonna be heading back to the dyno when Dave gets back from Texas. and we're gonna be dialing in the quarter horse a little bit better than we did last time. So we're gonna take some of these spark plugs out, and we're gonna check the gap on them. You know, when you start actually making power and you put, you know, nitrous, supercharger, little turbo kit, you know, these are some of the growing pains, things in your car that you got to upgrade. Ignition system is always one of the main concerns when you're doing any sort of high performance aftermarket. It should be one of the things at the top of your list, because it's usually, like me, always at the bottom, because you think you got to make all this power. Well, you know, you got to get some spark into the cylinder. Dad's car doesn't have an MSD box. It's a stock ignition setup. We're going to start from the spark plugs first. Probably not the best setup you see going on right here, but this is just budget spare parts that we had around here. I think another problem we might have is we might have a fuel delivery issue too. So we're going to check that before the end of the video to make sure. I'm pretty sure I did the wiring upgrade on this. If you don't know what I'm talking about, when you're putting a fuel pump in a Fox body Mustang, got to feed it some fuel, right? You got to get a regulator on it, get some fuel to the rails, put some bigger injectors in, and you got to wire your pump. I did a video on that a couple years ago. Pretty informational. I got it right here. If you can check on the channel. But let me get these some of these spark plugs out and take a look at them and see what they look like. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if I remember changing these when we put the turbo on. So that's why we kind of started with the plugs in the ignition system. Now, this is my number 7 plug. That's a 90-degree boot, because this is GT40P heads on a on3 turbo style setup header. It does work, I'm telling y'all. You can see all the GT40P, everything clears just fine. Both sides. I think that one has one over there that's a little bit on the 90-degree boot side. So but we'll pull out all the other plugs real quick. Maybe it isn't just an ignition thing, like maybe an ignition box. Might be something to where we change the plugs and maybe throw an MSD box on it next time we hit the dyno, which shouldn't take too long. But I'm not gonna do that in this video. But little spark plug where you cut it down about a ½ inch or something, specifically on GT40P heads, and you just use a wrench. Definitely was running lean, if anything. For being old plugs, they needed to be changed anyways. The passenger side is going to be a little more tricky for us, as it's a turbo kit. We're going to probably have to move the downpipe to get to it, but I'm going to try to go around it to see if I can get the plugs out. I know a lot of you guys relate to the GT40P, GT40 stock bottom end builds. This is relatable for if you're just now getting into the genre. Stuff that you need to look for: plugs, tune-up, ignition, all stuff, PIP, distributor, all kind of things that could go wrong with your ignition, especially when you start trying to put some mods on it, trying to make some power to your car and get some power to the wheels. So I understand it. Okay, it looks like the last 4 are, yeah, they're pretty old. We've been running on those plugs for so long that it was due for a change regardless. Well, I don't think I've changed those since the supercharger. That was probably a bad idea. Last thing we want to check before we head out is I wanted to check to make sure that I did the wiring upgrade. Now, basically what I mean by that is we've been running a wired pump in my black car in, you know, Project Hot Wheels and the stock bottom end builds we've had here on the channel. And I've always been a big advocate of wiring up the pump. And we have done that, as you can see here. This is a relay, and this is a 10 gauge wire coming straight from the battery with a fuse and a ground. And this is like a 35 amp style relay. Orange and black wire that comes from the factory harness actually comes into the relay, closes the bridge, lets the 10 gauge wire power the fuel pump instead of running the power through the wiring on the factory. One of the biggest things that Fox bodies suffer from, when you start adding power, you start putting power to it, it's not going to pump the proper volume that you're going to need to get the car to run. So we did a video, like I mentioned earlier, where you can wire your pump up with 10 gauge, and it makes a significant amount of difference even on a stock setup. Very first mods that you want to do to a Fox body Mustang is get that alternator out there, do a 3G conversion, SN95 alternator, run a wire over to the mega fuse in your car's lighting system, and the car will just run that much better with 130 amp versus the 75. And then when you start doing the pumps, you start wiring the pumps up, definitely a big upgrade. We're going to keep wrenching at this. Like I said, I think we're going to install an MSD box or mess with the ignition, maybe even change the distributor before we head back over to dyno. We will be dynoing again next week, so I want to make sure that these new plugs are in here, new MSD boxes in here. Talked about a little bit about parasitic loss. That's really important, some things to look for. A lot of things you can learn from Dad's Combo here on the channel. Appreciate everybody for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing. Leave me a thumbs up, leave me a comment below, and let me know what you check out that join button for membership. Appreciate all my members here on the channel. Got some merch, Stick Shift Life at neomustangs.com. Go check that out, support the channel. We will see you soon in the next video. Thanks for watching.